to episode 21 of our podcast. I'm Alex, one half of the Sober Experiment.
And I'm Lisa, the other half.
How are you, Lisa?
I'm all right, thanks, Alex. See you?
Do you know what? I'm actually starting to feel the effects of lockdown, but not in a negative way. I quite like not seeing anyone. Is that sick?
No, I absolutely get it. And I think I saw something the other day on an article saying that literally only 9% of people want life to go back to normal after this is over.
Well, they hadn't asked me. I definitely want my life to go back to normal. I'm just enjoying it right now.
And that's what I mean. I think it's. I think people are going to view things very differently after not being able to go out for a long time.
Speaking of not being able to go out, yeah, you mentioned something about our next guest, and you actually called the episode "The Ultimate Lockdown." It's so true.
The ultimate lockdown. Like, this could not have come at a better time.
So I met a lady through Facebook called Tessie Castillo. I think that's how you say it. I hope that's how you say it. And she is an author. She's written several books, but this particular book she's co-authored with 4 inmates who are serving on death row. They're going to die on death row. They're going to be executed. And, you know, their crimes are serious crimes. And we've actually interviewed one of those 4 co-authors called George Wilkerson. And he's incarcerated for double homicide. So it's very, very serious what he's done. But the reason that we've decided to interview him is because of the similarities and the relatability that he can bring to our podcast about getting sober.
It's just such an unusual thing for us to be able to do. And I'm kind of like really excited that we've had the opportunity to do something like this. I remember a very long time ago, a friend of mine telling me that she had been accepted to write letters to somebody on death row, and she was really excited about it. Now, she'd put that on her Facebook, and the response was really, really interesting, because there was a bunch of people that was like, oh my God, that would be amazing. That would be so interesting. And yet there was another response from people of like, why would you want to do that?
Yeah, and I do think this will raise those kind of emotions, this podcast. There'll be a good number of people saying, why would you even give this man the time of day? He's done horrific things, which he has. But I think when people do listen to this, they might actually see that he's travelled a journey like anyone else has. I'm not saying all's forgiven and it's all okay, you know, but people have to listen and make their mind up for themselves, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. I think I, for one, have always been one of them people that is really interested in something like this. So to have the opportunity, such a rare opportunity to actually get to speak to somebody inside the prison, for me, is just so interesting, and I really hope that everybody else finds it as interesting as we did. You know, he's done some amazing things, and I think what people will be really surprised at, and something that I was very surprised at, is how much you actually relate to some of the things. Yeah. And I think it's kind of like, oh my God. And I'm a big believer that anything can take a turn, can't it? It's just a moment. And I think listening to him, it made me really emotional. It made me feel weird. I didn't understand my emotions afterwards. I was kind of really sad. I was happy. It was just really unusual, I thought, after we'd spoke to him.
Yeah, I felt the same, because like you've just said, you'd like to think that that's never going to happen to you, and that you are the person that, you would never do anything like that. But when I heard about his upbringing, the struggles that he'd had in life, and I'm not saying that everybody who has these struggles turns out to be, a murderer and should end up on death row or whatever, but he didn't stand the chance, did he?
No.
The chance. And I think that's where the sympathy and the empathy comes from, that he was never really given the right chance from day one.
Ever. And I think I'm really looking, we can't say anything too much at the beginning, because you really want to we've not fully discussed it since we recorded it, so I can tell that we really want to talk about it. So without saying too much, this guy is now an award-winning writer, an award-winning artist, and a poet. He's won a Pen Award for his essay, LimpGreyFur. He was a finalist for the Cathy Bowers Chapbook contest, and he's won a Gold Award in the Capitalising on Justice art competition. He's also been an editor for Compassion, which is a newsletter for people on death row. And I think, when you listen to him and when you talk to him, and even at the end of our podcast, I don't think even he realises exactly what he's accomplished. And his book, do you want us to tell them?
No, go on, because I don't exactly know what you're going to say.
This book has now been
the banned,
from the prison.
Yeah, it's been banned not only from any correctional facility in North Carolina. We've literally just found that out, that it was released in March, 20th of March, and it's been confiscated from the 4 co-authors on death row and banned because it poses a threat to the jurisdiction there, or the correctional services there. I don't know exactly the wording on that, but yeah, it's been taken down and put in the category of banned in North Carolina correctional facilities. So yeah, it's a shame. George is never going to get to hear this podcast, I don't think. He did record it, and I guess, listen to us dial in. Here it goes.
You have a prepaid call. You will not be charged for this call. This call is from
George Wilkerson,
an inmate at Central Prison. This call will be monitored and recorded for customer assistance. Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hello.
Hi, George. I'm Alex. Thank you so much for being on our podcast to share your amazing story. And we honestly feel really privileged to get to speak to you. Your transition, reading the chapter of the book, is one of the biggest that we've seen.
Hi, George. This is Lisa. I'm hoping that you'll be able to recognise our different voices as we go through this. But I agree. I'm so pleased that that you can share your story with us. It's madness for this, but we've been really looking forward to speaking with you. We know now that you're an award-winning writer, an artist, and a poet. And we know through the book that the one that you've co-authored with Tess, but for those that haven't read the book yet, I'm just halfway through your story actually. Can you give us a bit about your backstory? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure, no problem. Well, my mom is Korean and my dad is white American. And so when he was in the military back in the 70s and 80s, he met my mom over there in Korea while he was stationed there. They got married, had us kids, 4 of us boys, and moved back to the States. And my dad was paranoid schizophrenic, but we didn't know it back then. So it started setting in, the symptoms started expressing themselves, and he started just kind of losing it. And, my parents got divorced and became really combative toward one another, like enemies. And so they started trying to make us kids pick and choose between them. And, it kind of grew pretty violent in the home as my dad sort of degenerated. And then when I was 6 or so, my dad had tried to thaw the pipes out in the winter because they had frozen, and caught our trailer on fire, burned down our home. So we were homeless, 4 boys, age 4, 5, 6, and 8 years old, and being homeless sort of threw us into on the welfare and put us in what we call the projects over here. So like low rent apartments that were subsidized by the state. And when we moved into those apartments, that complex, it was we were the only non-Black family that was in that complex at that time, and so we experienced a lot of racism and violence, and just it was a whole different world. And crime was rampant, drug use was everywhere, and so I kind of had my little coming of age years in that culture, and I got involved in crime and drug use and fighting, and it just one thing led to another that and it ultimately culminated with me coming to prison back in 2005, charged with 2 counts of murder.
George, thank you so much for sharing all that with us. I just wanted to know a little bit about your very first encounter with the law. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, my first real encounter with the law was actually the time that I reached out to the law for help. Because like I said, I grew up in that neighborhood where crime was rampant. So, the police were always present and, trying to do drive-throughs and, scare people and try to run drug dealers off the corners and stuff like that. But those weren't really encounters because, they were sort of distant. We were running from them. But you definitely didn't try to interact with the police. But one time I did, and it was one night when I was 12 years old. And I remember I said my dad was schizophrenic and really abusive, and he would just explode in rage over just random things. We just never knew what might trigger my dad. Things that you would think would trigger a person's anger didn't trigger my dad's anger, but other things that you didn't think should trigger anger would. For example, if he caught me smoking a cigarette, this before he knew I smoked as well, but when he caught us smoking, he didn't get mad about smoking cigarettes or sneaking cigarettes or stealing cigarettes. But if I went to set my drink on the table and spilled it on accident, he might just fly into a rage and beat me half to death for spilling my drink. So it just was really unpredictable. And then the next time I spilled my drink, he might not say anything at all about it. So it just, like I said, it was just really inconsistent and unpredictable. And I don't remember what it was exactly, but one night I triggered my dad's rage, and he just became murderous almost instantly. And he picked me up by my throat and was literally choking the life out of me. My feet were not even on the ground. He just held me up in the air, choked me. And my older brother, Michael, who was 14 at that time, just looked at me, and I was sort of begging him with my eyes to just do something to help me. And Michael started crying and screaming. He just rushed our dad and attacked our father. And my dad dropped me, and him and Michael started fighting. And Michael just looked at me and just told me to run. And so I'm crying, and I take off running barefoot out of the apartment. And my friend lived in an apartment down the street, so I ran all the way to his house, and I'm, incoherent while I'm sobbing, trying to relate the story about how my dad just tried to kill me. And his mom, my friend's mom, was telling me, she's like, "Look, George, you can't stay there with your dad anymore. He's going to kill you," because he was sort of infamous within my neighborhood. I mean, in my neighborhood, all the parents beat their kids, but like everyone knew how bad our beatings were. Like we walked around with bruises on our arms and on our backs, and broken bones. So people, they didn't really get involved. People minded their own business, but they knew that our dad was pretty vicious. So she was telling me, she was like, "You can't go back to your dad. You've got to get some help. You've got to call the police." And that was taboo. There, you just never called the police on anyone. So, for her to tell me to call the police was a big thing. And so she convinced me, and I called the emergency service number, which is 911 over here in the States. I told them what happened, and they sent a couple officers over to rescue me, basically. So the officers picked me up, and I told them my story about what had happened, and they took me back up to my apartment to confront my dad. And my dad is standing out there on the porch. And the officers, they were really nice to me, and really, they seemed to be genuinely sympathetic. It was a white officer and a black officer. And so they escorted me up there to the porch to face my dad. And there was an officer on either side of me, one on my left, one on my right. And one of them had his hand on my back to comfort me while I related to what had just happened that evening. And so they confronted my dad with that testimony. And my dad he admitted it right there in front of the officers. He said, "Yeah, I did it. I did all of it." Because I had related to years of abuse. And the officer just looked at me, and he looked at my dad, and And he just pushed me back toward my dad and told me, he said, well, you must have done something to deserve it.
Oh, God.
My dad just smirked, stepped out of the way, and I went into the apartment. And the officers left. They didn't arrest my dad. They didn't do anything to help me. They just shoved me right back into the lion's den, so to speak. After that night, anytime my dad was, not every time, but sometimes when my dad was about to beat me, or right after he just got done beating me, he would drag me into the kitchen either by the back of my neck, or he'd grab my ear and drag me into the kitchen where the phone was. And he would pick up the phone and he would dial the emergency services number or the child protective services number, and he would shove the phone to my ear and say, here, call for help. And I would just look at him and I would take the phone and I would hang it back up in his cradle, because I knew that there was no help that was going to come that way, from that direction. So I just really lost all faith in the police or the law after that night.
And I'm not surprised. That's just the emotions that raises in me. It infuriates me. It's, just, I can't even begin to imagine how that must have made you feel and growing up with that. I really, really can't.
Hopeless is, I guess, the one word that just comes to mind. I just really felt trapped and hopeless.
It's just mind-blowing to think that, that was your childhood, and it just makes me furious and really sad. It just raises so many emotions.
Did alcohol and drugs play a particular part, alcohol and or drugs, I should say, play any particular part in the double murder?
Well, this is something I've been writing about for the past 7 years, is trying to untangle exactly all these different factors and how they played a role in shaping me, and still continue to play a role in shaping me and just helping me to see the world in a different light. That's what writing is done. But with the drugs, like I said, I got into the drugs pretty early on. It started at 11 or 12 years old, and just it was just so common around there. It was normal. So I was pretty heavy into it, selling it and doing it, just a bunch of different drugs, and was addicted early on, and I struggled with addiction ever since. So, yeah, I mean, it definitely shaped just the way that I saw the world, the way I engaged the world. It shaped my decision-making and my responses to everything, the people I hung around. Just everything in some way was connected to either drug use or drug selling or something. It was as much a part of my life as eating or taking showers or drinking water. So yeah, it definitely had a huge impact on me.
It was just your normal, wasn't it? Which is really interesting. I think me and Alex often talk. So we run something called the Sober Experiment, and we both chose sobriety. And I think when you make that decision yourself, it's kind of straightforward and easy. But whereas with you, your sobriety was more forced upon you. It wasn't an actual choice as such. I know, like known as a bit of a spiritual leader in the prison. Can you talk us through what getting sober was actually like for you in your situation, and tell us about how you coped with it? What was your coping strategies?
Oh, okay. Well, when I first got arrested and I was at the county jail, I was still doing drugs, because they would come in, they would get smuggled in, it'd be contraband, and I was doing different drugs than I did out in the world, because in here it's more pharmaceuticals, because guys get prescriptions and pills were easier to smuggle and all that. So when I got arrested, being spiritual, I knew that my struggle was spiritual in nature. I've always believed in God, although I wasn't a follower. I wasn't always seeking God. I was seeking something else. Maybe like just the powers or the miracles that were associated with God. But once I started becoming more serious and trying to be true to who I am and who I believe God wants me to be, I recognized that the way that I was in the past wasn't working. Like me trying to do it my way wasn't working. I was so immersed in drug culture, even in prison, that part of the struggle, I think, was trying to separate myself from people. So that was like a key factor. But the problem with being in prison is that you can't really separate from people because you're like all around, you're always around them. You're stuck on the same pod with them. So I would have to literally face problems that before, out in the world, I could just run away from. Out in the world, I could just avoid the person or not call them anymore or whatever, move to another town. But in here, I couldn't do that. So in here, I was forced to confront my problems head on. And I think that's really when I started becoming a man in my eyes, the way I understand being a man. I think up to then I was just really immature and I didn't know how to handle problems. I've encountered so many obstacles and dangerous territory along the way. But, the first step I think was I had made that decision that I'm not going to do drugs anymore. I had promised myself, I had promised God, I had promised my family, because I knew that drugs was one of the major factors that led to me coming to prison. Just being involved in that culture. So, I just really struggled with saying no to people and being rejected by people because in here it's the dominant culture. So it's like, I'm the weird guy. I'm the guy everyone's saying is holier than thou or acting holier than thou. Or, I got a lot of criticism and just, snide remarks. People saying things like, oh, well, you weren't doing that when you're on the streets. Why are you trying to do it now? Now you're on death row and they're going to execute you. Like, what's the point? So I just had to wrestle with just all these self-doubts, all the criticisms of people around me. And, that was the hugest part of it. And, being sober now, it's like the world was just really strange because I had been high for so long that it was my normal. So now, like being sober, I felt like I was high, so to speak. I felt intoxicated and, my thoughts would clarify because they weren't muddled by drugs in my system. So I was starting to think about things a lot that I before would just run away from or cover over with the drugs. It's just been a huge battle on so many levels. I'm just scratching the surface there to hope maybe that would give you something to grab onto and maybe focus in on a certain aspect of that, if you like.
I find that absolutely intriguing because even whether you're inside, whether you're outside, it seems to be a really common theme. My childhood was like a fairy tale compared to what you've just described, but I would say I had a difficult childhood. And one of the things that happened after I chose to get sober was all of a sudden these memories came flooding back of things I'd done, of things other people had done, of things I'd said and they'd said, and actions I'd taken, and lots of regret, lots of shame attached to that. And it's quite interesting to hear that, you've gone through this whole process and really never known any different. I'm interested, actually, just something that's popped in my head. Did you ever try to get clean and sober before on the outside?
I did. When I was out, like this was 2005 when I caught this charge right here, but back in the year 2000, I had just gotten out of jail in April of 2000. And I met this girl when I got out. She was 19 and I was 19, and she came from a Christian background, and I didn't. I came from a non-religious background, but we were together for a couple of years, and we were really heavy into experimentation with drugs, a lot of cocaine and LSD and stuff like that, ecstasy and what we call magic mushrooms or psilocybin. So I remember we used to go to her parents' house a lot because they were a close-knit family, and her mom would see us smoking cigarettes and stuff. And, her parents didn't know anything about our drug use, but she saw our addiction to cigarettes. And I remember her mom telling me the story one day about how before she...
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Okay, I'm going to call right back. That way I don't have to interrupt the story.
Thank you for using Global Tel Link.
Hello?
Hey, George.
Hi, George.
Okay, Hey, greetings. Let me pick this story back up. So, like I was saying, I had this girlfriend, and her parents were, deeply immersed in Christianity. Went to church every week, but her mom had told us this story, and she, would always bug us to quit smoking cigarettes, and we were trying to quit, but we were really addicted to cigarettes, just like we were to different drugs. But her mom told us this story, and she said that before she became a Christian, that she used to smoke cigarettes too, and I just really couldn't picture it because she was just just so straight-laced at this point that I knew her. But she said that when she became a Christian, she prayed that God would just take the craving from her because she had tried to quit smoking cigarettes and she couldn't. She had tried so many times and just couldn't. And when she prayed for God to take the craving for cigarettes away from her, instantly he did. And it was just like that. Like she just put down the cigarettes and never desired them again and didn't struggle with it or anything like that. And I was kind of blown away by it. And generally I would like question that right there, but I had had some experiences with her parents, and I was like, she had no reason to lie, and she was just so sincere, and I was kind of amazed by that. And I had seen, growing up in the neighborhood that I was in, people addicted to crack. When a person gets addicted to crack, in my neighborhood, generally, they never quit. They would do it until the day they die, literally. But I had seen two people just overnight quit smoking crack, cocaine, and both of them said that they had gotten saved and God had delivered them from it. So that was, 3 different people that I had heard share that sort of testimony or witness to the power of God. So with this girlfriend, we had experimented with cocaine, like I said, and had some bad experiences with it and tried to quit. But one night, this is 2 separate occasions actually this happened, but we had been doing cocaine probably for about 4 weeks. So we weren't like strung out like you would think people were strung out, but it started off that we were in control of it. But for about a week there, we realized we kept saying we weren't going to do any more coke, but then we kept buying more coke. So we recognized that we might be becoming addicted to it. So one night we were in the middle of doing coke. So we had spent hundreds of dollars on this pile of cocaine. And about midway through, we weren't even enjoying it. We were just having bad feelings, and we were crying and ashamed that we were addicted to it. And it's like just there was this moment where we both heard God speaking to us and telling us that if we would ask Him, that He would deliver us from the cocaine. And we thought we were hallucinating, but we both heard it, and we both confirmed it. And we just really sensed that God told us that if we took a step out in faith, that He would deliver us from it. But what we had to do was take the cocaine that we had left right then, worth hundreds of dollars, and flush it down the toilet. We couldn't take another line and try to quit. We had to step right then out on what He was asking us to do and do that. So we looked at each other and we both agreed that we did not want to do cocaine and that we were powerless to quit on our own. So we took the coke and flushed it down the toilet. Now that night it was bad. I mean, we were coming down and crashing from the coke. And it's not that we didn't have the cravings for a couple of weeks afterwards, but we had the power all of a sudden to say no and stick to it. Like before, we would say no and we would give in and we would go get it. But then after that night, we would say no and stick to it. But about a couple months later, we had a one-night relapse where we thought that we had conquered coke and, we could try it again. And about halfway through that night, we experienced the same thing. We realized that, we couldn't do it at all. We couldn't do it once a month or once every couple of weeks, right? We had to just, God was telling us to quit completely. And so we had that same experience again that night. So I had those experiences while I was out in the world. But I was still doing all those other drugs, the LSD and the marijuana and, smoking cigarettes. And I wasn't really a drinker, but so I was still doing all those other things, but I didn't think they were dominating me like the cocaine was. But I was so immersed in that culture and, I was trying to get away from that lifestyle and I couldn't. So like when I was trying to do it on my own, I just couldn't do it. But when I came to prison, when I got arrested, I remembered those two different approaches to trying to conquer my drug addiction. The nights that, the things that I had heard other people witness about God delivering them from crack and cigarettes, and my own two personal encounters with God delivering me and my girlfriend from cocaine, and then, the years that I struggled with trying to quit all those other things on my own. And I couldn't. I failed. The only times that I saw anyone conquer it, or even in my own life, was when God was involved in it.
So obviously, when you were inside and you were on death row, and you've kind of decided that this is it, you're going to go sober, you've used the spirituality and God to help you through that as well. Is that right?
Yes. I still had all those struggles around me, like I was describing. But when I came here and decided, came to the point where I was really going to try to do what I believe God wanted me to do and keep the promise that I had kept, that I had made to myself and my family and to God. I knew that I couldn't do it on my own. I knew that I was going to have all these. Well, I didn't know exactly all the struggles I was going to have, but I knew some of the struggles I was going to have. And I just prayed. I was like, God, I can't do this on my own. I know I can't. I can't. So you're going to have to give me the strength. You're going to have to just empower me to do this. And when it came to the drug aspect, it was almost overnight. Like I just didn't desire them anymore. Generally speaking, there were a few times where I was like, you know what, I can do this. Let me try this. I kind of gave in. And when I did, I just did not enjoy it at all. Like all the pleasure that had formerly been in it just was not there. I just didn't enjoy it even a little bit. And so God did that for me. He made it so distasteful to me and so unpleasant when I did it that I don't crave it anymore. So honestly, the hardest struggle was with quitting smoking cigarettes. The drugs themselves, after a couple of years of being here, the temptation wasn't even there for the drugs, but we had cigarettes for years, and I had been smoking cigarettes since I was 11, and honestly, it was hard to quit smoking cigarettes than it was to give up cocaine.
It's weird that you say that, because since going sober, my mum's actually gone sober as well alongside me. She's been sober 19 months now, but she still says to this day that she really struggles with cigarettes because she stopped smoking around the same time, and that's the one thing that she struggles with. And it's just so fascinating to hear you go through things where you are, that people are going through on the outside as well when they choose to stop drinking. It takes so much strength to do what you've done and to stop the drugs and to stop the smoking. I just think it's, and people even outside think that we're strange, don't they, Alex?
Yeah, definitely.
When we tell people we don't drink, we don't smoke, they're like, they think it's weird. So I can't even imagine how you dealt with that, being in your situation. How did you deal with it when people were saying, like, that's weird?
I'm still dealing with it because it was, how do I explain? Like, there's some people who their whole lives, they are generally just upstanding people. I mean, they seem to do everything right. And they have one or two areas that they struggle with in their life. They just say they struggle with smoking cigarettes. And they're like, man, if I could just quit doing that, the rest of my life would pretty much be in order. But with me, it was like the opposite. It was like 99 things out of 100 were just really screwed up in my life. And I had maybe one area that was okay. And I mean, just on so many levels, like just the way that I thought, my values, the way that I defined everything, my formulaic responses to life. Like, I grew up in a culture where if someone insults you, like, you have to fight. I mean, there were just so many attitudes, behaviors, and thought patterns, and just emotion. Everything was just all tangled up. So being in prison also sort of like intensifies that, because these people grew up, generally speaking, in the same way that I grew up, with the same values. So it's just, everything was just magnified. And so I'm struggling with the social aspect of it. was really difficult because I feel alienated in some ways. I think since I've been consistent, people are starting to see me differently and actually respect, what I'm doing. They see I'm not just pretending. I'm not just being what you call a jailhouse Christian, because I have nothing to gain here, unless God works a miracle, I'm going to die here. So it's not like I'm going to get relief in my case legally, or I'm not going to be rewarded in any way. So I have no other reason to do what I'm doing unless I'm sincere. There's no one that's going to praise me or pat me on the back or give me anything, or there's nothing to gain from it. I'm actually making my life more difficult by trying to do what God wants me to do. So I still struggle with it in a lot of ways, but really I would just do with a moment by moment thing, decision by decision. Just when each situation would arise, I might have, like, someone might make a comment and insult me. It's like, okay, from my old way and from the way that people carry themselves in here, I'm supposed to react a very specific way. And so I would pray about it. I remember the first time it happened, someone said something and and they said it in front of everyone else too, and I was in a rage. And I think what saved me was it happened to be count time at the time. So we didn't have a chance to fight. And so we had to go lock in our cells for an hour. And so during that time, I'm praying to God. I'm like, God, you know how I have to respond to this. And you're telling me to go a different way. But you know how everyone's going to think about me. They're going to think I'm weak or whatever. I just wrestled with that. And I was praying. I was like, God, if you want me to turn the other cheek, so to speak, the only way I can do that and forgive this guy is if he apologizes for what he said. And this is not one of those guys who are known to apologize. In fact, I've never known him to apologize about anything that he said or did since I've known him. And so I'm really asking God for a miracle. And I'm like, God, this is the only way. If this guy doesn't apologize, it's only one response to this. I have to fight this guy. I have to, or no one's going to respect me. They're going to think I'm weak, and other people are going to try to prey on me. But as soon as the doors open for count, the guy popped up in my doorway, and I'm like, I'm just tore up. Just I'm angry, and I felt humiliated and wrestling with God. And this guy just starts apologizing. He's like, man, I'm sorry for what I said. I was in the wrong, and and it just took all the air out of me, because to me, I was witnessing a miracle on the scale of watching the Red Sea part, because I knew that this guy was not one to apologize. Like it can only be God that can move in this guy, to move him to apologize like that. So, I just saw the scripture come to life where God says, for him whose ways are pleasing to him, to God, he makes even his enemies be at peace with him. And so I had known that scripture, and I saw that, according to the ways of the world, there are certain ways that the world works. But when God gets involved in it, it's like this X factor comes into play, and new things start to happen. Things out of the ordinary can occur. And so I saw that, gave me the courage to do what God wants me to do, because I know that with him, things are not necessarily going to work out the way that you would think it would, according to the ways of the world.
I just wanted to add something on to the end of that, to ask you one more thing. The inmates alongside you, or the guards, or any kind of support groups, did you get any help from like people in there at all along your journey, or was it all yourself and God?
Well, there are no groups in here like Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous or anything like that. Mostly it was just God and me, just my personal journey. But back in 2009, I think 2010, I can't remember the date off my mind, but I started going to church, and going to Bible study. And although it's not a support group, I just felt connected to the church community, and the Christian guys would see my struggles, and we all just were aware of how difficult it is to be a Christian in this context, because the values that God establishes in Scripture are in many ways completely opposite of the values that most prisoners carry. It's the way of the world. I mean, we all know that, but some things kind of align behaviorally, like respect, for example. That's a big value in prison, but it's also a value that God teaches us. So, like when it comes to respect, it's like it doesn't violate my religion to respect people. Like actually, I'm supposed to respect everybody. So that kind of aligns with the prison values. But there are other values that are completely contradictory. But just being in church like that, being aware of one another's struggles, we would encourage each other and sort of praise each other when we would recognize one of us handling a situation appropriately, because part of my struggle was that feeling of alienation and ostracism, like feeling like I'm being kicked out of the group because I'm trying to live a certain kind of way. But when I started going to church and, realized, what, this is my new family, this is my new community, this is my new group, this is my new identity. Although there are only 2 or 3 Christians on each pod here, those were 2 or 3 that were on my pod. And, we would go to church together. And so we would witness the way that we lived. Because, it's weird, like when you're out in the world and you're going to church with people, unless they're your family, you really don't see how they live every day. You just see them for that little period of time that you're in church. But in here, we go to church together, but then we come back to the pods together and we see each other 23 hours, 24 hours a day, except for the times when ourselves. But we see how we each live. We see the comments that we make and the testimonies that we share while we're in church. But we also come back to the pods and see the reality of our behavior. So that's one of the main struggles. But people might see a situation arise that I'm caught in, and we all know how a person typically would handle it in prison. But if I or one of them handled it according to the Bible, we got into the habit of encouraging each other or counseling each other from that perspective, like saying, hey, I know that other guys are going to tell you that you ought to fight this guy, but God says this is how you should handle it. So don't just go fight the guy, rather go try to talk to him and try to be gentle or respectful or whatever. We would counsel each other from a biblical perspective as to how we should handle a situation. But just having someone recognize that, hey, I'm not being weak by not fighting. I'm trying to actually be strong and do what God wants me to do. That's why I'm not fighting. It's not that I can't fight. It's not that I'm afraid to fight. It's that God says it's wrong, and fighting was always my first response. And that's also one of the reasons why I'm in prison now. So I recognize it's not the right way to handle the situation. And just being part of a community, a church community like that now, where we could kind of encourage each other and counsel each other from the angle, just really, it helps strengthen me, and I think it helps strengthen the other guys in here to motivate us to do the right thing.
From reading your story, George, that's something I suppose that you've never really had that community or then people around you growing up or ever through your life. You was taught to fight from such a young age, wasn't you? I just think your story is so, and people will be surprised at this, but it's so actually relatable. And I think people will relate to your story a lot more than they expect to. Mm-hmm. I'm really looking forward to people picking up this book and reading the story and finding out about you. But can you tell us a bit about the book and meeting Tess and what's all that done for you? Did you ever think that you'd be an award-winning writer?
No, definitely not. I've never really been good at anything in my life except for the wrong things, which I think was part of one of the things that reinforced my criminal lifestyle, was that mostly I was pretty good at it. I'm in prison now, but I got away with a lot of stuff. It's just one of the things I was good at was art, though, and that's a healthy thing to be good at. And I had, gotten into art when I was 5 years old, and so I became pretty good at that over the years. And when I got here, it was, I really tried to cultivate my artistic ability. So I had no desire to write at all. No poetry, no, I just wasn't interested in it at all. But about 2013, summer of 2013, they put out a memo and advertised a class here on death row. We never had classes, but the class was for a writing class. And it was Writing from Captivity. So it would focus on reading the writings of authors who were in captivity in some form when they wrote whatever it is that they wrote, whether that be someone like Paul from the Bible writing from a literal dungeon, or Martin Luther King writing letters from a jail cell, or just throughout history, different people who had written compelling stories that continue to impact the world today, but they wrote those stories from a place of incarceration. And so it just really showed us the power of writing. But I had no interest in taking that writing class, actually. But I just really sensed God kept bringing it to my mind. And, and I was arguing with God. I was like, why do I keep thinking about this writing class? I don't want to write. But I just really sensed God putting it on me to just sign up for this writing class. So I signed up for it, not really knowing what I was going to get into. And, just when I went out there to the class and was hearing these stories, it was like I just had this epiphany, like God just opened my eyes, like, look, you're in prison, but you're not powerless. And I remember thinking at one time, what can I do? What can I possibly do from prison like this? And I was actually real suicidal for many years. And so I was actually contemplating suicide. At the time I had this train of thought, and I was just really depressed and thinking, my life is over. It's ruined. I'm just a waste of space. And God asked me a question, like he broke into my thoughts and asked me, he said, if Jesus were where you are right now, literally on death row, and he was under the same restrictions that you are, what could he accomplish from there? And, the answer was self-evident to me. I said, well, there's nothing Jesus couldn't accomplish. What couldn't he accomplish? Because Jesus had that faith, and his power came from his faith in God, his obedience to God. It was God who operated through Jesus to empower to do all the miraculous things that he did. And God said to me, he said, so it is with you and all my children. All of us have that same spirit. Christians have that same spirit of God in us, and all of us have access to that same power of God if we just obey, if we just have faith. And so it's like he just told me, he's like, there's nothing that God can't accomplish in me and through me, no matter where I am, whether I'm in a prison cell or whether I'm in a dungeon like Paul. It doesn't matter, because he's the one who's in control. He can open doorways. He can give me abilities I didn't have before. And so when he connected that with the writings of Paul, for example, I keep coming back to him. But Paul's writings are scripture. And so many millions and billions of people have read the scripture for thousands of years. They have read Paul's writings and continue to be influenced by Paul's writing. I am influenced by the writings of Paul in scripture. I study the book of Romans and Corinthians and stuff, and I shape, God shapes my life around those texts. And I'm like, and God is telling me, he's like, maybe he'll give me a word that I'm supposed to write down, and that will also shape people. I don't know, I don't know what God's going to do, but just having that moment of understanding that it doesn't matter what restrictions I'm under, that God can accomplish anything through me if it's his will. It just really opened my mind and changed the way that I engage the world. So it's like now I have this attitude where all I have to do is just do what God tells me to do. If he accomplishes something in me and through me, that's up to him. I'm not I'm not in control of the results. All I have to do is just obey. So that's the attitude that I try to maintain today in this content.
So do you enjoy writing now?
Oh, yes, that was the shocking thing is when I took that writing class, I remember we had this poetry workshop. And with the poetry, there was just this moment in there where I just fell in love with poetry. And so I just enjoyed reading it and writing it. And then I don't know, the same way that God made drugs distasteful and unpleasant for me, he made writing just really enjoyable to me. I don't know, something happens to me whenever I'm writing, when I'm working on a piece of creative writing. Like, I don't know, it's just really pleasant. I mean, it's just one of the most enjoyable experiences that I have, and it just enriches my life in so many ways to be able to write. So yes, I definitely love writing and the writing process, and I love it.
It shows, I think, as well. I mean, I've not read as much as Lisa, but, she's telling me most days, you want to read this bit here, Alex? He's a lovely writer. He's a good student, Tessie, that's what we want to know.
I'm sorry?
Was he a good student?
He was not in my class. So the writing class that he's talking about was one that was offered before mine. And my class was a little bit different. It was a journaling class.
Right.
He was not in my original class. I think he missed the sign-up date or something. So I met with the guys for several months. And for my very last class, I had someone else who had been in my class come up and say, hey, I have this friend, George. He wants to join the class. Do you think that'd be okay? And I said, absolutely. He can sign up. He's welcome to join. But before he was able to come to the class, I wrote a letter and published it in the local newspaper about what I was doing and teaching.
Yeah.
And out of the prison. So
I read that.
Yeah, George and I have actually never met.
Wow.
Yeah, he's the only one that my other co-authors were all in the class. I got a lot of face-to-face interaction with them, but I've never met him.
Oh, she's lovely, George.
You have 60 seconds remaining.
Before we go, George, I've got to say it's been so lovely speaking to you. And honestly, we're really, really grateful for you sharing your story with us. I just want you to know that your story will and is inspiring people. You are making a difference. And I don't know whether you realise that, where you are, but it is inspiring. And, if you can do this and you can get sober and, do the things that you're doing from where you are, it is going to give people hope. It is going to inspire them. And I think everything that you've wrote is just fantastic. And I just want to say thank you for that. And thank you for your time today.
Thank you for the opportunity. And I appreciate the encouragement because I do need to hear it because it can be hard and it is a struggle, but I really do believe the Bible. I do believe in the power of God. And for a long time, I've wrestled with doubt. But when I see God working around me, especially in these little seemingly mundane or invisible moments, but to me, I know how the ways of the world operate. And I've done it so many times that I know how things ought to go. But then every time I step out in faith and do what God says, like I said, it introduces this X factor into the situation and something miraculous happens. So I just, I want other people to experience that too. It doesn't matter where you are or what you're going through, but if you really believe God and you do what he says, God always keeps his promises. Always.
Honestly, I'm speechless by it, and that's not often that happens to me, George. I'll have you know.
It's definitely not.
But honestly, I know you said the word you felt hopeless, and I just want to add to what Lisa's just said, that your story, through the book, through things like these interviews, it does show that under whatever circumstances, you can be the person you want to be and that God wants you to be, if that's what you believe in. And I just think you're incredible. Thank you so much for taking time to share your story and being so open and honest with us. Thank you. We really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a privilege for you to give me this opportunity to just witness to what God has done. Thank you.
I can't wait to get this podcast out, and I can't wait for people to listen to it. And I think what people will be shocked at more than anything, and I said this before, is how much they will actually relate to your story. You know, we kind of put ourselves on the outside as a them and us, and that is not the case. And I think talking to you shows that. It's made me a bit emotional.
Get out it.
It has. Thank you.
Thanks again, George. And thank you as well, Tessie. Thanks so much for putting us in touch and for giving us the opportunity to speak with George. Thank you. And yourself.
You're welcome.
Lovely speaking to you both.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Bye, George.
See you later, George.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Good night. Talking to you.